All right, so the Vietnam War is still part of it's still part of Learning Objective 6.3, but it's kind of a bigger deal. I'll try to get through it here in about 10 minutes, but you might want to. You're at a good stopping point if you're in the middle of taking notes and it's late or anything like that. You can kind of come back, and this is kind of its own little thing, our own little part of 6.3. So I mentioned Vietnam, and I kind of wanted to give you some background on why there was a problem in Vietnam in the first place. So in the late 1880s to World War II, France is going to rule most of Indochina. Indochina is going to include Vietnam as well as Laos and Cambodia, some of the other countries around it. And so by the end of World War II, Vietnam is really tired of having foreign rulers. So a guy by the name of Ho Chi Minh, okay, pictured here, he is going to be the leader of the Vietnamese independent movement. He is going to create the Indochinese Communist Party. And in 1940, remember, like Japan was trying to expand a lot of its power prior to Pearl Harbor, and they were trying to become an imperialist nation themselves. So they are going to take control of Vietnam in 1940. And Ho Chi Minh is going to kind of try to help get Japan out. Remember, it's about independence from everybody. Vietnam doesn't want anybody else to be leading them. So he has kind of his own fighting force called the Viet Minh. They are going to be how he tries to rid Vietnam of foreign rule, fighting them violently sometimes. And by September of 1945, Ho Chi Minh declares Vietnam an independent nation. And that's really important because him declaring it doesn't really mean that the French and the Japanese are gone. The French are going to get their territory back in Vietnam, and we're going to kind of see them still have a presence in Vietnam upwards until the 1960s, when the United States is going to take over the conflict. So as I just mentioned, and I'm getting ahead of myself, I apologize. So the French are going to move into Vietnam. They're going to fight and regain cities, especially in the south. And by 1950, the United States is going to begin economic aid to France. Again, remember, our policy here is containment. We want to keep communism contained to the area that it already is and not allow it to spread. So France is fighting that battle for us. We're going to provide them with some economic assistance. But again, we're not going to get involved until, as what happens here, the Viet Minh, Ho Chi Minh's fighting force, they are going to drive out the French. The French are tired of fighting this battle, okay, that is really not very fruitful for them at all. So they are going to pull out of the war. Remember, this is the domino theory at its finest. So in 1954, the Viet Minh are going to overrun the French at Dien Bien Phu. Okay, the France is going to surrender. They're going to leave Vietnam. And then the Geneva Accords, which is a vocab word, you need to know that is going to divide Vietnam at the 17th parallel. Communists get north, and then there's going to be a democratic leader in the south. So again, you see here, okay, just like Korea, okay, North Vietnam, South Vietnam, okay, north is communist, south is democratic. They call for an election to unify the country in 1956, so in about a year or two after the Geneva Accords are signed. And we're going to see that those elections are never going to happen for a number of reasons. So after the French, remember, we're trying to contain communism. Okay, after the French pull out of Vietnam, somebody has to take over and make sure that communism is not spreading. So there was a guy, unfortunately, who was leading South Vietnam by the name of Ngo Dinh Diem. And he was anti-communist, so the Americans liked him, but he was also very corrupt. So he refuses an election because Ho Chi Minh, while being a brutal leader, he is very popular because of his land distribution, because he has like a really positive message for Vietnam, kind of like that whole Make America Great Again, or the Make Italy Great Again, or the Make Vietnam Great Again. He is saying these things that are getting people, to like him. And he's redistributing land to people who are in poverty. So he's going to be a really popular guy. And again, Diem, the other guy, the South Vietnamese leader, he is just really corrupt. He is afraid of losing the election to Ho Chi Minh, so he actually refuses the election. And even so, actually later than that, Eisenhower, who's going to take over, so Eisenhower is before JFK, so this is before JFK takes over as president, he refuses to, he doesn't want to allow the elections either because he's worried that Ho Chi Minh, the communist leader, is going to win. So that's, again, we only want, it's like kind of ironic, isn't it, that we only want to allow free elections if we know that the Democratic leaders are going to win. So the United States and the South Vietnamese are in the same boat. So the U.S. is going to promise military aid for stable reform government in the South. But like I said, Diem is corrupt. He stifles opposition. He even restricts Buddhism, which is going to lead to a lot of protests, one of the most famous protests of all time. And there's a fighting force in the South called the Viet Cong. And this is a communist group that is in opposition to the democratic Southern leadership. So, and remember that the way that this is worded, it kind of sounds weird. It sounds like they're against communism. They're not. They're pro-communism, and they're against the democratic government of South Vietnam. So they are going to start killing officials. They're going to start kind of creating chaos in the South, trying to really get the people to want to go to become communists. There's also the Ho Chi Minh Trail is also a vocab word for you. You need to know that the North Vietnamese and the Viet Cong are going to use the trail, which is really heavily wooded. I should have put a picture of that up. You really can't even see it from the sky. Like if you were in a helicopter, you wouldn't be able to see the Ho Chi Minh Trail at all through the dense jungle that is in Vietnam. So that's really safe. It's a really safe route for Ho Chi Minh to use to supply the Viet Cong in the South, and we'll kind of get through, we'll talk more about that later, but that's the main thing you need to know, is that it was a supply route for the North Vietnamese to supply the Viet Cong in the South, and then vice versa. It was very difficult for U.S. troops, French troops, whatever, to see what was actually on the trail without actually being in the trail itself. All right, so don't write this next part, but I want to kind of just discuss this periodic, like this first part really quick, is we see, because Diem he's anti-Buddhist, we see a huge burst in protests of Buddhist monks. And so Diem's popularity is gonna plummet from corruption, the lack of the land reform that the people who are in poverty really wanted. And he is going to kind of try to start this strategic program to fight the Viet Cong, and he's going to kind of start moving people around. Okay, if somebody was supportive of the Viet Cong, he might move them away from the places that their families have lived for hundreds of years in order to fight them. So the attacks against Buddhism and the people as well, it's going to lead to protests. The very famous protest here is a Buddhist monk is going to protest Diem by literally dousing himself in gasoline and then setting himself on fire. Okay, so he killed himself, okay, in protest to Diem's rule. And because of all this stuff going on, the people are upset, okay, the Buddhists are upset, and so the United States is going to actually step in, U.S. military, and it is going to perform what's known as a coup, okay, on the South Vietnamese government, on Diem's regime, and then Diem is going to be assassinated. So the reason I had you go through this is because we have U.S. troops who are once again not only participating in a coup, like all that stuff with Castro, that was an attempted coup, which is literally it's called coup d'état, which is French for cutting off someone's head, I believe. Don't quote me, but that's so they were unsuccessful with Cuba, but they were successful with Diem. But again, remember, Diem is he was a democratic leader, but he was very corrupt. Anyway. Moving on. So now we have President Johnson. So I told you that President Johnson is going to escalate the conflict after JFK is assassinated. The South is going to grow a lot more unstable. There's a bunch of different military leaders who are going to take over in South Vietnam. The country's very unstable. We're trying to establish a democracy, but there's really this always a looming threat from North Vietnam. So a lot of people sorry about that. They're not going to know what to do. And Lyndon Johnson, short for LBJ, okay, he thinks that the U.S. can lose a lot of international prestige if the communists win and if the policy of containment fails. So this is going to sound a lot like the Spanish-American War for just a second. I assure you it's not. So there's a place called the Gulf of Tonkin, which is right here, okay, right by North Vietnam. And there was a U.S. ship, okay, that was in the Gulf of Tonkin, and you'll never guess what happened. Well, it didn't blow up like the USS Maine, but it did get fired upon, quote unquote, by a supposedly North Vietnamese troops. Now, what we probably know, what probably ended up happening is that it was people who were in like rowboats. This was like a battleship or something similar, and it was fired. It might have been fired upon by like people in rowboats or somebody who might not have actually been part of North Vietnam. And what a lot of conspiracy theorists think is that, President Johnson had essentially like orchestrated the Gulf of Tonkin incident to give him the ability to go to Congress and say, hey, I need broad powers in order to deal with this problem in Vietnam. And that's exactly what happened. So there is a U.S. ship is fired upon, quote unquote, in the Gulf of Tonkin. Because of that, in response to that, President Johnson goes to Congress and he asked them to pass the Tonkin Gulf Resolution, which is going to give him broad military powers to protect U.S. interest in Asia. So specifically to contain communism, he needs to be able to send troops places without a declaration of war from Congress. And that's crazy, guys. Remember, we have checks and balances. You're going to learn all about that in government. But the Congress is the only branch of government that can declare war. And essentially now what the Tonkin Gulf Resolution allows him to do is to conduct an entire war without Congress's approval. And so that's insane. Again, we have So by 1965, we have 8 Americans killed. This is separate from the Tonkin Gulf Resolution. And so then President Johnson is going to escalate the conflict even further. He's going to order the sustained bombing of North Vietnam. And then finally, we have U.S. combat troops that are sent to South Vietnam to battle the Viet Cong. So we now have a full-blown Vietnam War. And you see here, again, here is President Johnson right here. But again, you see the troops in Vietnam. Again, I know it's a little bit small, but you see by 1965, okay, we have 200,000 troops. And then by 1967, 1968, when it's at its height, we're going to have over 500,000 troops in Vietnam. Again, all without a declaration of war, which is insane. All right, so I want to, again, and I'm talking a little bit longer than I wanted to, so I apologize about that. But I want to just go ahead and finish this now. Just a couple more things. So the fighting specifically in Vietnam was very different than what any United States soldier had experienced before. The terrain was a harsh jungle. Okay, it's very hot. Okay, disease spreads really easily when it's in these hot, wet conditions. Okay, so that is a really big thing. That's actually what a lot of U.S. soldiers are going to lose their lives to, is because of a lot of just things like jungle fever and malaria, all kinds of other diseases. And the Viet Cong, they have lived there their entire lives. They are used to the terrain of Vietnam, and they are going to use that to their advantage. So they are going to be, they're actually going to dig a lot of tunnels. They're going to use what's known as guerrilla tactics, okay, or it's from the Spanish word guerrilla, which is war. And they're going to conduct these hit-and-run ambush tactics. They're going to hide among civilians as well. So that's the thing, is you can't tell one a Viet Cong person, somebody who is against American involvement, and a South Vietnamese person who might support American involvement in Vietnam. You can't tell the difference between them. Okay? They are going to look essentially the exact same, and that's not. I don't mean that to sound racist. It's just that's the case. Okay, it's the same thing like in America. If you put two people together, you're not going to really know who's you're not going to know what they're thinking. Okay, who's for you, who's against you, and that was the main problem with Vietnam. Is they were able to hide very well. They were familiar with the terrain. They built all these tunnels, these very intricate tunnel systems here, okay, with air vents. Okay, again, they would live underground. There'd be concealed entrances under cooking pots in these huts. Okay, things that you would, like the U.S. soldiers wouldn't even really know to look for. The tunnels are going to be able to withstand airstrikes, launch attacks. They are going to actually connect entire villages. They're very elaborate. The terrain is also going to be laced with booby traps, landmines that are going to be laid by both the United States and the Viet Cong. But again, remember that we're dealing with the Viet Cong are going to be much more familiar with the territory, so they might know where the United States troops might be going, and they can set the landmines, the booby traps there ahead of time. This is going to be what's known as a war of attrition. Okay, and we're going to try. The United States is going to try. Westmoreland he's the general at the time. Okay, he is going to try to destroy the Viet Cong morale through attrition. He's going to try to make it so the Viet Cong is going to lose more troops than the United States is. But again, this is a brutal fighting. Okay, that is just again a lot of fear. Imagine being a soldier, like not knowing when your next attack is going to come from. We're not fighting in a traditional way anymore. And that's really why Vietnam was kind of as bad as it was, because that's really going to hurt morale. The United States is going to see this as a military struggle. The Viet Cong are going to see this as a battle for survival. A lot of people at the beginning of the war, and by people I mean United States citizens, they support the U.S. involvement in Vietnam to stop the spread of communism. But as this war drags on, and for almost a decade, to be honest with you, a lot of people are going to lose their interest. A lot of Americans are going to say, we've got a lot of problems at home. Like, why should we be fighting over here in Vietnam that really doesn't matter to us other than the fact that they want to be communist? So some people are going to say, hey, if you want to be communist, be communist. Okay, and they're going to kind of see that as, again, that's going to be really fearful for a lot of Americans, or at least lead to a lot of fear for Americans. So the other thing that President Johnson calls the Vietnam War, he calls it the battle for the hearts and minds of the South Vietnamese. So they want to try to stop the Viet Cong from winning support of the rural southern population. So they're actually going to do at first. The U.S. troops are going to go on a lot of like goodwill missions. They will like help the southern villages establish like clean water. Really try to help rebuild things that might have been destroyed by war or by the Viet Cong. So they're going to try to win them over that way. That's really not going to work. And it's just because it's really difficult to the same problem exists. We don't know who supports us and who doesn't. So they're going to start turning to a different tactic, which is kind of like a killing tactic of all of the jungle and all of the greenery that is around Vietnam, because that's where a lot of the Viet Cong were hiding. So they used two weapons specifically. The first one was napalm, which is a gasoline-based bomb that sets fire to the jungle. The other thing they used is what's known as Agent Orange. And Agent Orange is a leaf-killing toxic chemical. It's an herbicide, essentially. And what is so crazy about these two things, guys, is that they're going to be sprayed and they're going to be used all over Vietnam, specifically to try to find the Viet Cong, to find the North Vietnamese, but they don't really it's very difficult to keep civilians out of harm's way. So, with that in mind, we have things like, again, in this, we have really famous pictures here. The first one here is of what's known as Napalm Girl. This girl, again, you see her clothes have been burned away. Most of her body is covered in burns from napalm. Seeing her today, she looks, and she actually helps burn victims. She's a doctor now. But that is, this is just horrible things. Like this, and imagine seeing this as an American citizen. This is going to be completely shocking. So this is the kind of the part of the reason why there is so much or so much opposition to the war, or starting to be opposition to the war, because you're seeing pictures like this on the nightly news. Children that are just in tears. They're like horrified at all the things that are happening. Agent Orange specifically has a lot more really deadly effects. This is going to kind of get into people's lungs. It's going to really start affecting their DNA. The people who have children, they're going to be were exposed to Agent Orange. They're going to have horrendous deformities, and there's a lot more about that, and we can talk about that more in class. But again, this is an herbicide. This is a poison that was affecting regular Vietnamese citizens, and you can still see the effects of Agent Orange even today, we're 50, almost 60 years in the future, but again, it's still visible today. So again, all of this stuff is going to lead to a sinking morale for the U.S. troops, for the U.S. citizens as well. The guerrilla warfare, the jungle conditions, the lack of progress, it's going to lower morale. It's going to make this a much more difficult war to fight. A lot of soldiers are going to turn to alcohol, turn to drugs. Some of them might even kill their superior officers. They'll get court-martialed, or they'll have to go into exile. And there's a lot of government corruption, a lot of instability. It's going to lead South Vietnam to kind of start demonstrating against U.S. involvement. So again, just a couple other things here. This is the first thing, like a lot of the things that are going on in Vietnam are going to affect what's going on in the United States. So the war is very costly, as all wars are. We have to send more troops. Okay, it's going to cause our inflation rate to rise. President Johnson is going to get a tax increase to pay for the war, which will check inflation, but he has to accept a $6 billion funding cut for his domestic program called the Great Society, which is kind of similar to the New Deal that FDR did. But we can talk about more, we'll talk more about that next week. But this is the main thing that is it. I mean, it starts to hurt Americans at home, which is going to be a big deal as the war drags on, and it costs more and more money, more and more lives, things like that. So the thing about the living room war is that this is the first time that Americans have TVs in their houses as this war is going on, and we have media like photographers, journalists, things like that are going over to Vietnam, filming what's happening, taking records of what's happening, and they're reporting it back to the people. Every other war before it, we really had to just rely on what the government tells us. And kind of just say, hey, this is what's going on. So, I mean, so while the government in Vietnam is saying, hey, war is going great, it's, no big deal. Then you turn on the nightly news and you see things like Napalm Girl. You see things like, we're going to talk about the Tet Offensive here in just a second. And that's definitely a big difference between what the government has been telling the American citizens. So this is going to lead to what's known as a credibility gap. And so what that means is there is a gap between what the government is telling us and what the nightly news and what the images that are coming out of Vietnam. And it's something like it's just like, again, it's really hurting the government's credibility with the people. And again, you see this political cartoon that's from the time. You see like the general who is painting the fence white, and he's covering up the truth about Vietnam, because that's what people are seeing as they're watching the news on a nightly basis. So the main thing here about the working class is that they institute another draft system, which is based on your birthday. And so if your birthday got called, you would have to go to war. But this one is a little bit different. It's manipulatable, which means that, again, yes, all men have to register for the selective service, 18 to 26, but there's going to be a lot of people who are looking for ways to avoid the draft. So many people, mostly white men specifically, are going to get college deferment. And again, not everybody can go to college though, because it's a little bit expensive. In the 60s and 70s, it's a little bit expensive, not nearly as expensive as it is now. So not everybody's going to have access to that. So 80% of U.S. soldiers are going to come from lower economic levels, and this is going to affect minorities the most. And so this is another major problem, because you're going to learn about the civil rights movement later, but that is going to be so we're fighting this whole civil rights movement during the 60s, but at the same time we have them having to fight this war, and it's kind of showing the inequality that minorities and especially African Americans have to face. And that's what this next slide gets into, that African Americans are going to serve in disproportionate numbers in the ground combat, especially. The Defense Department is going to try to correct this by 1969, but remember, by that time we've been at war for almost 6 years. So again, that might be a little bit of an exaggeration, but still, there have been many years where African Americans had been fighting disproportionately in Vietnam. There's going to be a lot of high racial tensions, which is going to really make it worse, add to the low troop morale, and that's going to be a really big theme throughout Vietnam. Women are also going to serve. We have about 10,000 women serve, mostly as military nurses. Thousands are going to volunteer, especially for the American Red Cross, the United Services Organization, to try to help ease some of the pain of the soldiers, kind of set up huge nursing camps and try to help these soldiers kind of deal with what's going on in Vietnam. All right, last thing is the Tet Offensive. So in 1968, there was a surprise attack on South Vietnam by the Viet Cong. So in 1968, there is a Vietnamese New Year known as Tet. And most of the time in war, you can count on people not attacking on a holiday. Now, one famous example is George Washington at the beginning of the Revolutionary War in 1796. He actually attacked the British on Christmas, And that was partly one of the reasons why we were able to kind of turn the tide of the war and then kind of get back on track with the Revolutionary War. A lot of people thought we wouldn't last more than a year, and had he not done that, we probably would have lost the war. And so this is the same sort of situation. In 1968, villagers are going to go straight to cities to celebrate Tet, which is, as I said, the Vietnamese New Year. The Viet Cong are going to be among the crowd that are in over 100 towns, 12 different U.S. air bases, and the Tet Offensive is going to last a full month. They're going to start attacking. It's a huge surprise attack. They can't tell who is going to be enemy, who's going to be a friend. And the United States actually wins, and they are going to win the Tet Offensive, but it shows how powerful the Viet Cong were. Before the Tet Offensive, the U.S. government was saying, hey, yeah, war's almost over, we're almost there. And clearly, though, after the Tet Offensive, it shows that they had been lying, that they had been, that the Viet Cong were nowhere near defeat, and the Tet Offensive is really what shows that. And Westmoreland actually declares that attacks are the military defeat for the Viet Cong, but that's also not true, because clearly they are showing it took them a whole month, the United States a whole month to put down the Viet Cong, in the Tet Offensive. So again, we're seeing this credibility gap, and it's rising now. Before Tet, most Americans were known as hawks, which are supporters of the war. After Tet, though, mostly the hawks and doves were both at right around 40%. So people were, after the Tet Offensive, people are split down the middle as what they believe should be done with the Vietnam War. Mainstream media is going to start openly criticizing the war. We're going to see a lot more protests, especially on college campuses. Again, after studying the situation, a guy named Clifford, again, don't worry about that. That's going to be a guy in government. He's going to conclude that the war is unwinnable. President Johnson's popularity is going to drop. About 60% disapprove of his handling of the war. And he's actually not going to run for president again. He's going to decide that it's not a good idea, and he's going to step down. And then that is when President Nixon will take over, and he is going to finish the Vietnam War for us, which we'll get to at a later date. Guys, thank you so much for putting up with me. I appreciate you, and I'll catch you in the next one. Take it easy.